"Don't ever put your hands on me again," Faye Dunaway shouted at Roman Polanski in front of the entire crew, her voice cutting through the set and freezing everyone in place. That single moment changed everything. To understand why a Hollywood star would openly confront her director at the height of production, we have to go back to where the tension truly began. Hollywood, 1973. The Chinatown set didn't feel like a movie set. It felt like a pressure chamber. Roman Polanski ran it that way on purpose. Every movement was watched. Every word mattered. Faye Dunaway arrived early, as usual. Hair perfect, makeup untouched, script already marked. She didn't talk much on set, not because she was shy, but because she guarded her energy. Polanski noticed that immediately. He didn't like actors who guarded anything from him. To him, everything on that set belonged to the film, including the people. Jack Nicholson sensed it too. He joked with crew, laughed, smoked, but even he knew when Roman focused on something, the room tightened. That morning they were shooting a close shot. Polanski watched the monitor, leaned forward and said, "Stop, her hair is wrong." The cinematographer said, "It matches yesterday." Polanski said, "No, it doesn't. It's catching light wrong." Faye looked up and said, "Then call hair and makeup." Polanski said, "I'll handle it." And before anyone reacted, he reached out and grabbed her hair, pulled it back, adjusted it like a prop. Faye froze for a split second, then slapped his hand away, stood up and said, "Don't touch me." The set went silent. Polanski said, "I'm the director," Faye said, "and I'm not an object." Polanski said, "You're being difficult." Faye said, "You crossed a line." Jack stepped in, said Roman, "Let's reset." Polanski snapped, "Stay out of it." Faye grabbed her coat, said, "I'm done for today." Polanski said, "If you walk off, don't come back." She stepped close and said, "You don't scare me." Then she left, slammed the door. Polanski stood there, jaw tight, eyes cold, then said, "Reset," like nothing happened. But nothing was the same. From that moment on, Polanski didn't forgive challenges. He punished them. The next days, he pushed Faye harder than anyone else. Again, colder, less emotion, more control. He'd stop a take and say, "No, not like that," without explaining. She finally asked, "What do you want from me?" He said, "Obedience." She said, "That's not acting." He said, "Great." "Acting comes from pressure," she said. "Pressure isn't humiliation." He smiled, like that answer pleased him. The war was quiet now. Polanski spoke to her through assistants, notes instead of words, directions passed like orders. Jack noticed scenes were blocked to keep them physically apart. Roman would speak while staring at the monitor, not at her. Faye responded by becoming colder, sharper, more contained. Every look measured, every line delivered without softness. Polanski hated that because he couldn't break it. One night, after 15 takes, he said, "She's holding back." Faye said, "No, I'm holding together." Polanski said, "Same thing to me." The crew stopped breathing. Jack later said it felt like watching two people test who would blink first. Polanski believed authority made truth. Faye believed resistance did. The shoot dragged on, 12-hour days, minimal breaks. Polanski corrected everything, but never praised. Her silence became his weapon. One afternoon, he called her into a private room, closed the door, said, "You embarrassed me." She said, "You put your hands on me." He said, "On my set, I decide boundaries." She said, "Then you don't deserve trust." He stared at her, then opened the door and called the assistant like the conversation never happened. From then on, he ignored her completely, which was worse because it stripped away even conflict and left only control. Faye didn't quit, because quitting would mean losing the fight. She stayed, delivered every scene with precision. Jack said some of the best takes happened when nobody spoke between action and cut, because everyone was afraid to interrupt whatever tension was alive there. Polanski began shaping the film around her performance, tightening the frame like a cage. Close shots, limited movement, shadows everywhere she noticed and leaned into it, made the character smaller, colder, trapped. The tension fed the movie, whether either of them wanted it to or not. By the final weeks, exhaustion replaced anger. Polanski watched playback obsessively, said little. Faye barely spoke off camera when the last scene wrapped. Polanski said, "That's it," and walked away. No speech, no thanks. Faye removed her makeup, slowly packed, and left without looking back. Months later, during editing, Polanski tried cutting one of her strongest moments. Jack argued it was the heart of the film. Polanski said, "Fine, keep it, but don't say I didn't warn you." When she steals it, he watched the final cut alone, said, "It works," and left. Faye saw it later at a private screening. Someone asked how it felt. She said, "Like surviving something." And that was it. Roman Polanski didn't raise his voice after that first explosion. He didn't need to. The punishment shifted into structure, into rhythm, into repetition. Every day on set became the same pattern. Arrive early, watch everything, say little. Then, when the camera rolled, push Faye harder than anyone else. He would stop a take and say, "Again," without explanation. Again, slower. Again, colder. Again, less feeling, until the words lost meaning. Faye stopped asking questions because questions gave him control. She learned quickly that silence was the only defense. Jack Nicholson noticed she conserved energy, spoke only when the camera was on, delivered exactly what was needed and nothing more. Polanski hated that restraint because he wanted reaction. He wanted cracks. One afternoon, during a long interior scene, Polanski stopped the take and said, "You're hiding something." Faye said, "The character is hiding something." Polanski said, "No, you are." She stared at him and said, "That's not your business." The assistant director looked away. Polanski leaned closer and said, "Everything on this set is my business." Faye didn't blink. She said, "Then do your job and frame it." Polanski walked back to the monitor, said nothing, and let the camera roll longer than necessary, forcing her to stay in that moment. Jack said later that the silence felt aggressive, like a dare between them. The crew started timing how long Roman would hold before saying cut. It became a game nobody wanted to play. During breaks, Polanski would sit with the editor, talking loudly about shots, while Faye sat alone, reviewing lines. No one joined her. Not because they didn't like her, but because proximity to her meant proximity to conflict. One night after wrap, Jack caught up with her and said, "He's pushing you because he can't control you." She said, "I know." Jack said, "You could complain to the studio." She said, "And then what? He wins by changing the fight?" She wasn't wrong. The studio had visited the set once, seen tension, but also seen dailies that looked incredible. And that was enough. Polanski knew it too. That knowledge made him bolder. He started rearranging schedules to keep Faye waiting, delaying her scenes, then demanding perfection when she was already drained. She never yelled, never cried, never gave him what he wanted. One scene required a breakdown. Polanski said, "Don't cry." Faye said, "The scene calls for it." Polanski said, "No." She wouldn't. She paused, then played it dry, hollow, distant. It was unsettling. Polanski stared at the monitor, then said, "Print," without comment. That night, he was heard telling a producer, "She's stronger than she looks." The producer said, "That's why she's dangerous." Polanski didn't argue. As shooting moved toward the end, the tension sharpened. Polanski reduced communication to hand signals, nods, looks. Faye responded by tightening every movement, minimal gestures, eyes doing the work. The film became colder, sharper, more controlled, because neither of them would yield. During the final week, Polanski insisted on silence, absolute silence between takes. No talking, no movement. Faye stood in place, waiting, sometimes minutes after cut, until someone told her she could move. Jack said it felt like a standoff disguised as professionalism. On the last day, Polanski called action. Delivered, no notes. Let the scene play out. When he said cut, he simply said, "That's it," and walked away. Faye waited for something, a word, a nod, anything. It didn't come. She went to her trailer, removed the character piece by piece, makeup, hair, wardrobe, packed her bag, and left the lot without goodbye. Editing began. Polanski spent hours alone shaping the film, controlling pacing, tightening scenes. He cut around Faye, then realized he couldn't remove her without hollowing the movie. Jack argued for her moments, said they were essential. Polanski resisted, then relented, saying, "Fine, but don't mistake necessity for approval." The final cut was locked. Chinatown premiered to acclaim. At the first press event, reporters asked about collaboration. Polanski said, "The shoot was intense, but productive." Faye said the role demanded discipline and left it at that. They never looked at each other during the questions. The film opened to strong reviews. Audiences praised the tension, the restraint, the unease. Nobody knew how literal that feeling was. At a later press conference, a reporter asked if they would work together again. Polanski smiled thinly and said, "I don't repeat battles." Faye said, "I don't repeat survival." The film went on to be celebrated. The conflict stayed behind the curtain. Two people who created something lasting by refusing to bend to each other and never once pretending it was easy or kind. After the first wave of praise, the tension didn't dissolve. It followed them into every public appearance. Polanski and Faye were scheduled to appear together for promotion. Studio handlers briefed them separately. Keep it professional, keep it short. Don't engage backstage. They stood in the same room, not speaking. Polanski reviewed notes. Faye stared at the wall. Jack Nicholson stood between them like a buffer. A reporter asked what it was like working together. Polanski answered first, said it was demanding but necessary. Great films aren't comfortable. Faye waited, then said, "Some experiences are about endurance, not enjoyment." Polanski glanced at her for half a second, then looked away. Another reporter asked if there were clashes on set. Polanski smiled, said, "Strong personalities create strong cinema." Faye said, "Silence can be louder than arguments." The room tightened. Handlers moved to the next question. Later, alone with press, Polanski said actors must be guided even when they resist. Faye, in a second, separate interview, said guidance isn't control. The film opened wide, audiences felt the cold tension, praised the restraint, called it haunting. Polanski accepted the acclaim with satisfaction, said the discipline paid off. Faye accepted praise quietly, said the role asked a lot of her emotionally. When asked if she would work with Polanski again, Polanski said, "Once is enough." Faye said, "I finished that chapter." The film became a success, entered conversations about great performances. Neither of them revisited the set in memory together. No reunions, no reconciliation. The story of the shoot stayed fragmented, whispered among crew, known but not displayed. The conflict ended not with an apology or victory, but with distance. A finished film, a press tour completed, and two people who never shared a frame off camera again. Chinatown stood on its own, a controlled, precise, unsettling film, shaped by two wills colliding, neither yielding. And when the cameras stopped, they carried away different things. Polanski carried a finished vision. Faye carried the knowledge that she stood her ground, and neither ever claimed the other was wrong. They simply never stood side by side again. Thank you for listening to this story. If you found it interesting, please like, share, and subscribe for more hidden Hollywood stories like this one.